everybody. Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we want to make marriage real, fun, and simple. This episode, we're looking at the question, why is money such a big deal in my marriage? On today's episode, we've got another Ted Lowe interview, this time with Lee and Martika Jenkins. Lee is an author, pastor, and a former college and NFL football player. He spent more than 25 years in the financial services industry before planting Eagles Nest Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Lee and Martika have been married for over 28 years and have 3 grown children. This interview was recorded live at a marriage and money event at North Point Church here in Atlanta. And it's got a ton of great insights to help you understand why money is such a big deal in your marriage. Here we go.
We are so excited that you guys are here. So excited. I love your heart. And, Lee, just when you came and shared with our staff, just about your passion for so many things, but money is key to that. So introduce yourself a little bit. Let these guys know who they're hearing from tonight.
Of course, I'm Lee Jenkins, and in about 2 weeks, I'll be celebrating 30 years of marriage to this incredible woman right here.
30 years.
So excited. And so I spent 25 years in the investment business, trained on Wall Street. 6 years ago, I got out of the business because the Lord was calling me into full-time ministry. So I started a church from scratch with 15 people called Eagles Nest Church in Roswell, Georgia. And now we're over 1,000 members, and God is just really blessing it. And I'm really excited about marriage. My 2 subjects that I'm passionate about the most is marriage and money. And people ask me all the time, they say, what's the key to being married for 30 years? And I tell them, I say, well, it's simple. I run my house. I run the vacuum cleaner, I run the dishwasher, I run the washer and dryer. I do whatever she asks me to do. That's the key. So I'm excited to be here today. Absolutely. And by the way, we have 3 children. We have 3 children. Well, they aren't children, 3 grown-ups. Yes, they are adults. Thank you, Lord, for being an empty nester. It is great.
Yes.
It is great.
We love it.
Yes, we do.
Well, as someone who has 3 teenagers, tell us a little bit about that. Give us hope for those of us who still have big.
Well, our children are now 28, 26, and 23. And it was a joy raising them. It was a joy, watching them grow and see their gifts blossom. And now it's really a joy to have them gone. So when they come home, we go, so how long are you going to be home? Because it kind of messes up our flow now. So.
Well, tell me this. You guys, as we've talked earlier, you say you had different money personalities when you guys met. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we were completely opposites. We make the statement that when it comes to money, or when it comes to marriage, really, opposites attract. But sometimes when it comes to money, opposites attack. And so we were the classic spender, saver dynamic. I was the saver, she was the spender. She never met a credit card that she didn't like.
That's right.
And I didn't get my first credit card until I was 27 years old. And so I just did everything with cash. Now, some of that is because I was drafted by the New York Giants when I came out of college at University of Tennessee. And so I got a little check. And so I just bought everything cash. Of course, my career was over in a year. So NFL stood for not for long for me. But nonetheless, that what it afforded me to do is at a very young age, I had a little money in the bank. So when I wanted something, I just bought it cash. And so unlike Martika, she didn't go to school on a scholarship. So she borrowed her way through school. And according to her, I guess you just thought that was the way to buy things. It's just to borrow your way.
Well, back in those days, back in the 80s, you sign your name one time and you got 5 credit cards, right? Right in the courtyard at school. So I was so excited to have those cards. I would just spend them all the way to the max.
So that was right in college.
Right.
They're all there, and you're going, oh, I can do this. Is easy.
Right.
It just cost me plastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And the amazing thing, when we first met the first week, my sister introduced me to her, so they were roommates. I went over Martika's apartment, and I'm sitting at on the sofa looking on the coffee table and going through her photo album. And it's pictures of Martika and her friends, and they were in Hawaii, and they were in all these neat places. And I'm like, man, not only does she love the Lord, not only is she beautiful, she's rich too. And I'm thinking, she has to have a lot of money going to all these places at such a young age. Little did I know that years later, I would have to pay for all those vacations. Thank you. But I love you for it.
You had a great time, didn't you?
Right.
So tell me a little bit about how you guys got together, got married.
Well, we met actually in California, and we met the weekend that I quit my job to move to Atlanta. So I quit my job on a Friday, met him on Sunday, And he helped me find a place to live when I got here because I didn't know anybody, and it blossomed from there.
Yeah. My sister introduced us. She was literally felt like the Lord wanted her to move from California to Atlanta and didn't know anybody, and then meets me in the interim. The rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about those first few years when it came to money and finances and how that impacted your relationship.
Yeah, it was really actually kind of tough because of our money personalities were so opposite. And Lee had to kind of tighten me up and I had to loosen him up because he was so cheap. I mean, it was like ridiculous. So, and we didn't have a lot of money. So our dates were like going to the West End Hotel downtown and having water in the lobby. I mean, it was really tight. I mean, so tight that we would go to the Hallmark store and get cards while we're in the store and read them to each other and say, this is what we would get each other if we had $1.35.
That's fantastic.
It was really tight. So, but as the Lord blessed us financially and as we learned more about biblical principles of finances, it really helped our relationship to actually get more intimate and then also for our relationship to grow as a couple.
Yeah, she's so right. It was very frustrating at first, but we just had to wrestle, and not physically, but wrestle with some of our philosophies and some of our history. Because when you marry someone, you're not just marrying that person, you're marrying their history, you're marrying their habits, you're marrying what they have been taught maybe by their parents or what they have seen over the years. And so it was a clash of histories, but we handled it very well because I knew that I probably needed to loosen up some. And she definitely needed to tighten up some. So believe it or not, it was very complimentary, even though we were financial opposites, but it was very complimentary.
So did it take you guys a while, or is it pretty immediate, like once you got married, to work through that?
No, it took us a few years to work through that.
To find your ways.
Yes, it did.
Definitely, yes. And we made a lot of the classic mistakes that a lot of young couples make, and the debt and all of that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But one quick story: my wife would put all of her dry cleaning in a garbage bag when she was going to take it to the cleaners, and she would lay it right by the door. And these were her business clothes. Well, she didn't tell me that. I thought it was garbage. So I see the garbage bag there, and I go and throw it in the dumpster and just throw away all of her business wardrobe, and it was gone. And so that kind of led to us, okay, what are we going to do? Well, we didn't have a lot of money, so we went and put it on credit, and just that was kind of the start of us getting in debt. So sometimes these things can happen, and you don't even do it on purpose.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about your work with finances and something you've seen with couples when it comes to finances.
Well, the biggest thing is it's a very sensitive issue. And a lot of couples don't understand how important it is to work together. The Bible says a husband should leave his wife, leave his mother and father. No, don't leave your wife, guys. Okay, leave your mother and father. Cleave to your wife. And then they will become one flesh. And so, in order to become one flesh, that means the two become one. It takes a lot of work. And it is very difficult for a lot of people to become one flesh when it comes to finances, because that means you have to get on the same team. You have to be in agreement with one another. You have to compromise. So it is very important. And I hate to say this, is that one of the reasons couples aren't successful financially is because they don't understand the biblical basis of marriage, and they are selfish. And you can't be selfish when it comes to this area.
So how did that play itself out in terms of purchases, in terms of decision, in terms of what we're going to buy, where we're going to live, what vacations we're going to go on? How did that play itself out, or has it played itself out?
Really, it was through lots of long talks and communication. When we got married, Lee was on 100% commission. So we had to talk about money probably more than most because we didn't know how much was coming in every month. So we had what we called Money Mondays, where we would just sit down and talk about, okay, what's happening with our finances, what's coming in, what's going out, what about lunches and all of those things. And we also had restrictions on how much we could each spend without the other's approval or agreement. So at that time, when we first got married, it was $50. Like, we couldn't spend over $50 without calling each other and go, hey, babe, I found this really cute dress for $60. Is it okay for me to buy it?
Yeah, that's right.
And then we upped it from there. But at that time, because we were so tight, we had to communicate a lot. And it actually helped our marriage because it helped us to become vulnerable to each other.
Right.
And it helped us just to become more intimate just by talking about money, because it's a tough subject to talk about.
It's absolutely tough. Yeah. So if you were working with younger couples, like you're sitting across from them, what would you say?
When you're young, you have to meet and talk about it a lot. As Martika said, we would meet every Monday. Now, some of that is because we had to. Again, I was on commission. My income fluctuated. But some of it was, it just helped our marriage. It helped us to communicate more, to understand one another better. And, and so it really helped our intimacy. I mean, just talking to each other, when you come into agreement, it just helps your marriage go to another level in every area. So I would just say, don't stay away from this subject. Fight through the discomfort and sit down, pray before you talk. And I'm telling you, once you break through those first initial meetings, it's going to be something that's fun, actually.
So instead of something that disconnects you, money can become something that connects you?
I would say it's the great connector.
The great connector.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because as a young couple especially, they have to decide on a budget, on their, what we call their spending plan, so that they can decide together how their money is going to be allocated.
Talk a little bit about that, because some people will say, especially with millennials, they'll say there's my money and there's your money. Talk a little bit about that. How do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, biblically, again, when the two become one flesh, that means everything. Okay, so that means the two become one. Of course, physically, of course, emotionally, but certainly financially. And so when you separate your money on purpose and you live two separate lives, you're really missing out on some deep intimacy. And you're also missing out on communication. One of the beauties of combining your money and doing things together and not having the my money, your money philosophy is it really does force you to talk. It forces you to compromise, to negotiate. And really, during that process, you get to know your spouse better. So we always recommend, unless it is a business account or what we call a little mad money account, it's okay to have some autonomy, but it just shouldn't be hidden autonomy. It should be purposeful autonomy, but the majority of the money should be combined.
Do you feel the same?
Absolutely. It's very difficult if a couple has been obviously operating separately financially. However, it also can create the two of them having independent spirits, almost like they are just roommates who are married. So combining your finances really does help you to become one in a different way, because you have to you have to compromise. Each person has to compromise on what's actually going to happen financially in the household. So,
Well, I told my wife, I said, here's the thing, because she's the saver and I'm the spender. So savers always are events like this, they're always the champs, right? They're always the winners. They're the one Jesus loves best. Now let's speak a little bit. Why is the spender? Why, is there anything redeemable in our souls?
Some of my biggest regrets, believe it or not, is looking back. And I was so tight, I was so cheap, I was always trying to save money. And most of the stuff we bought, like some of our early pieces of furniture, we eventually had to throw it out because, of course we upgraded, but I don't think we would have had to upgrade as soon if I had been a little bit more loose and to spending a little bit more money for quality.
Right.
So I actually regretted 5 years later, 7 years later, being so tight about everything. And so I learned from that, because I actually ended up spending more money in the long run. So I just learned that there's a give and take. Spending a little bit more on some things, believe it or not, is wise.
Could be a good thing. That's good. We took our oldest one on a trip to New York, and I had to really push for that trip for my wife. Oh, are you kidding me? But we get there, and we're driving by all the different places, the different plays and different things, and she just wanted to drive by them, and I looked at her and said, honey, we're going to eventually have to pay some money to go inside. And so she did. So they went to see a play, and she said, thanks for encouraging me to do that. I'm sorry. She goes, I'm sorry I did that. And she goes, we really had a great time. But I do feel like that there's this give and take.
Yes.
That sometimes that, again, on behalf of the spenders, sometimes you get to experience things that you don't want to miss out on.
Yeah. Well, just recently, my wife noticed about a year or two ago that I was just under a lot of stress. A lot was going on with me, ministry-wise, business-wise. And she said, block out your calendar from this date to this date. And I said, okay. And she said, cancel everything that you have. I said, okay, what's going on? She said, we're going on a vacation. And so she spent the money and made me do it. And it was the best vacation I've ever gone on.
So you're okay with that?
I was okay with it. But if she had asked me, hey, do you think we ought to go on vacation next month? I probably would have said no, because I'm a planner by nature, and I just don't do things like that, spontaneous. Yeah. So again, she's helping me to loosen up, and the more I do that, I think the better it makes our marriage.
Martika, way to go.
We do plan our vacations every year. I always plan them a year in advance so that we have enough time to pay for them over that course of that year. This particular year, I felt like we needed one more because he was under a lot of stress, and I started putting some money away so that we could, because we pay for everything in cash. So I just started putting some money away, and I got a great deal on this fabulous hotel in Mexico, and we went. He found out, I think it was the night before, he found out where we were going, and we had a great time.
Yeah,
had a great time.
So only a great spender could do something like that, man. That's where spenders, man, come in handy right there.
Just had to represent for
Yes,
a
right.
living.
Yes.
So you guys get really, really practical with the application. I've read a lot of books on money and marriage and the different things, but the thing I loved about you guys got really, really specific with this, and you have what you call the 10 principles of marriage and money, and I'm excited for people to hear about those. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah, I would love to. Well, we call it the 10 principles. It's kind of like the 10 commandments that Moses gave. We say, hey, these are 10 things, and maybe you're doing some of them, maybe you aren't, but we pretty much guarantee you there are probably 2 or 3 that you probably need to do. And so we're just going to kind of go through these and talk about
Love
them.
it.
All right. Well, the first principle is develop a spending plan. A spending plan. Now, some people call those budgets. We like the spending word better because you're going to spend money because you have to spend money. That's just
that feels better to my soul.
Yeah, it feels better to spenders, especially.
That's right. So, but it's nothing wrong with spending money as long as you have a plan for spending. And so, we tell people that this is very important as it relates to a married couple. And it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it forces you to work as a team when you talk about it together. Genesis 2:18, I love what it says. It says, the Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Well, why would God make a helper if a person didn't need help? Right. So the man evidently needed some help. But then he said suitable for him. So in other words, Adam was solo at first, and then God brought Eve for a reason. Now they were a team. And so in order to have an effective spending plan, you have to operate as a team.
To work on that together.
Yep.
Right.
And then there are a couple of other things, as my wife has already said, communication.
Communication, definitely Communicating is probably the most important thing about developing a spending plan, because you do have to talk about where the money is going, What are we going to save? What are our future plans so that we have money for that as well? And what needs to be done around the house that needs to be fixed? Just all of the different things that you have to put into your plan so that you can have money for it and not have to put it on credit. So it's really important that you talk about it. And if you have a spouse that doesn't like to talk about money, a lot of couples have one or the other just doesn't like to talk about that subject. Just ask them to just one time, let's just talk about the budget and just see kind of what's coming in and what's going out, just so we can have a kind of a bird's eye view of what's happening. And then just from there, get a little bit more into the details. Hopefully they would be open just to having just a general conversation over coffee about it. You don't have to make it like this big thing, but it's just important just to get started so that you can make some plans for the future.
So that's so key, because I think you guys have said there's a stat that of people in some kind of financial crisis. Can you remind us of that?
Yes. About 70% of Americans are experiencing some form of financial crisis, which means they are either in debt or they have insufficient savings for their goals, like educating their children or retirement, or maybe they've made a bad investment and they've lost money, or maybe they're just not making the type of income that they should make according to their lifestyle. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have money in order to have a financial crisis. It just means that you aren't clicking, that you aren't achieving your goals. And about 70% of people in America aren't happy with their financial status.
Also, with half of married couples getting a divorce, which is just a statistic, whether you're Christian or non-Christian, half of couples get a divorce. And the majority of those couples get divorced because of money, a money issue. So this is a really important topic to talk about. A lot of times that's happening because it's not discussed. And of course there are other situations that happen that are, just they didn't see coming or whatever, but just paying attention to this is really, really important for your marriage.
Yeah, one more thing. Money forces you to come into agreement. And agreement is so important for married couples. For instance, we've been talking a lot about these things, spending plan, but we don't always think the same. So agreement is when a couple literally agrees. It doesn't mean that one person is wrong, one person is right. It just means, okay, for this particular time, this is what we're going to do. And you come into agreement. And I'm telling you, agreement is powerful. It's a powerful biblical principle. And God blesses unity. I believe it is Psalm 133, how good and how pleasant it is when God's people dwell together in unity. And so a married couple being unified is a married couple that is blessed by God. So whether we had the same philosophy or not, talking about our budget, talking about our spending plan allowed us to, I'm going to say to fight, but in a good way, to fight for unity.
Wow. I know being married to a saver, when she knows the plan, she's way more comfortable.
Yes.
Like, it's when things come out of nowhere. It's when things, because I don't have to have a plan. I just I've got a plan to enjoy my life. But she knows that plan is very important. So you guys are saying, okay, we got to get a plan, because I got to imagine most of these people in crisis are in crisis because they didn't plan.
That's exactly right.
What's number two?
So develop a spending plan is number one. Number two is live within your means. Most people live at their means or above their means. But as a married couple, it is very important that you live within your means. And one of the reasons a lot of married couples don't live within their means is they often compare themselves to other married couples who have a nice house or a bigger house or a car or a boat or a vacation home. And oftentimes we don't do it consciously sometimes, but sometimes unconsciously we try to keep up with the Joneses. Now, we wouldn't admit that, but we look and see that somebody else got a new house, they refurnished it or this or that, and it starts to create really discontentment in us. And if you're not careful, that can cause you to spend more as a couple. So you have to really make sure you live within your means. I mean, I was in the investment business for 25 years. Many of my friends and clients had huge homes. And then many of my friends were in the NFL. So they had these huge homes. And so Martika and I would go to visit them, and then we would come back to our house, and it just seems like it was a little tiny house, you know? And it wasn't a tiny house. It was just that the other homes were so big. And it's just amazing how all of a sudden, I didn't like my house a whole lot anymore. And I'm just saying you have to be very careful that you stay within your means.
Yes. You definitely have to learn how to be content with what you have and resist the temptation to have more and bigger and more shiny and the best appliances, and they all have to match, and they all have to have the same, they all have to be made by the same manufacturer, and the new washer and dryers are out, I've got to get one, right?
And a new kitchen, like you said that you want.
Right, and he says, why do you want a new kitchen? You don't cook.
Yeah, that's
I said,
right.
but it has to look like I cook.
That's right.
So it's just, the images, the commercials, the billboards, it's all out there for us to want more, right? But we just have to plan. If we want more, there's nothing wrong with wanting more. We just have to plan for that more and not just make these spontaneous purchases that can completely throw our budgets off or can keep us from saving the amount of money we need to save so that when we do have an emergency, we can go to that cash and get it instead of putting it on a credit card. So.
And there is one more thing when it comes to living within your means. What I have seen is a lot of couples, the husband is the primary breadwinner in many of these relationships. Not all, but many of them. And so the husband acts like a financial dictator. In other words, because he's the primary breadwinner, then by God, what he says is going to go. That's what we're going to do. And so sometimes I've seen husbands disregard the wisdom of their wife, disregard the counsel of their wife, even in some business decisions. And I had to learn the hard way that God gave me this woman as a gift because of her wisdom. And so just because I was the so-called financial expert did not mean that I needed to disregard her opinions and her wisdom and her knowledge. And I did that a few times, and I paid a huge price. And so one of the things that I think couples need to do in order to keep their spending plan in check is to value each other's counsel. When my wife would say, you know what, I don't think we ought to do that. I said, well, we have the money. Well, I'm just not sure. At the very least, I would use that as a caution light. If she was not 100% on board, then I viewed it as God trying to either get me not to do it or to at least slow me down.
Listen to the wisdom
Yes,
of
listen
each
to
other.
the wisdom of your spouse.
And that happens in those conversations you're having, right? So this all ties together.
Right.
We're going to talk about this. It's great.
All right, number 3 is avoid becoming a slave to debt. We talked a little bit about that earlier. It's just important that your first inclination is not to put it on a credit card. Your first should be a debit card or cash, because that way you're actually spending what you have and not what you don't have. A lot of times, of course, when you go into a store or you're buying have a major purchase, the store is trying to get you to put it on some type of financing term because it's only going to be an extra $400 a month, or it's only going to be an extra $300 a month, and you're thinking, we can handle that, no problem. But as those things build, it can cause friction within the relationship because you're under financial pressure, and it's just not worth it. So just avoid becoming a slave to debt and start working towards not putting anything on credit.
Yes. Proverbs 22:7 says, just as the rich rule the poor, so the borrower is a servant or slave to the lender. And so the Bible doesn't say that debt is a sin per se, but it does say that if you are in debt, that you are a servant to whoever you're in debt to. And so I know a lot of couples, and it even happened with us, you get in a lot of debt, and believe it or not, it can put undue pressure on your marriage. It can cause a lot of stress, and it can hurt your sex life. I mean, I'm serious. The debt can weigh you down, but it has become a way of life in the American culture, and I believe it is one of the things that contributes to divorce. So the best way to avoid being a slave to debt is not to use debt, and it takes some sacrificing, but you can do it.
Right. That's good.
All right, the next one, number 4, is pay attention to your credit score. Pay attention to your credit score, those 7 digits. I believe it is Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is to be more desired than silver and gold. And so from a financial standpoint, our credit score is our good name or our bad name. And so there are a couple of things you can do. What's amazing is when Martika and I were engaged, we went through premarital counseling. And one of the sessions is when we had to reveal our debts to each other. And I felt really good. You know, I was like, well, I don't have any debts. And so she showed me her debt. And I figured she had X amount. Of course, it was like double or triple than what I thought. And then when we came to the credit score, well, you know, I didn't know a person's credit score could be that low, you know, when I looked at it, and we got a big laugh out of it. But the bottom line is I didn't go into our marriage with surprises in this area. We talked about our credit scores. We talked about our debt. We even talked about how we got into the debt, why we got into it. So it's really important to manage your credit score. All right, number 5. This one is one of my favorites. You want to say this?
This is find multiple sources of income. In other words, don't let your job just be your only source. Lee and I have always had, we've always had several sources of income. So if you have a hobby that you can turn into income, that would be awesome. If you have a skill, if you're a teacher, you can tutor. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do to make extra money that you can use. And maybe you can tag that money for your extra things. It could be for the vacations that you take every year. It could be for the new kitchen that you want. Whatever those things are that are not in your budget right now, you can use those extra sources of income in order to make those things happen.
Absolutely. Martika and I believe in this incredible principle. I believe it is Ecclesiastes 11:2. And it goes something like this. It's divide your portion or invest in 7 or 8 ventures. In other words, spread your money around because you do not know what kind of misfortune may happen. And so I believe we ought to do that even as it relates to our income potential. Instead of just relying on that one job. Well, you could get laid off. You could get fired. So we've always been the kind of couple to try to maximize our income potential. And so we've always had 3, 4, maybe even 5 sources of income. And we have found that because of the kind of economy we live in, that might be wise. Now, I'm not saying 4 or 5 different jobs, but I'm just saying, as she said, if you have a hobby, if you have a particular expertise, then why not take advantage of it? And so that's one of the things we encourage couples to do.
I love it, because I think sometimes we sit down with budget and we just keep moving the numbers around and we're trying to make this much work and we're going, this is not working. So to add some, as my friend said, side hustle.
Yeah,
Right.
I love it. Yeah,
Right?
Yes.
Everybody ought to have a side hustle or two.
Or two.
And we have had multiple side hustles. And again, it's just about maximizing what God has put inside of you.
That's great.
So number 6 is save and invest for the future. Very important. Obviously, we always say pay yourself second because God gets paid first in the tithes and offerings. And then pay yourself second. So if you give God 10% of your income, give yourself 10% of your income and live off of 80%. If that's too much right now, give yourself 5% or 2% or 3%. Just start somewhere where you're putting money aside in a savings account, and it's money that you are not going to touch unless it's some kind of emergency. Or spenders have the tendency to want to dip into that savings account and get a little out for something special, but it's important just to leave it where it is because, as the Bible says, the sun and rain fall on the just and the unjust. So there's always going to be times when it's a rainy season and things aren't going to be going exactly the way you want them to, or there may be some unexpected expense that comes your way, and you don't want to have to resort to credit and be under all this financial pressure when you could just go right to your savings account and get what you need.
That's right. And she mentioned a rainy day. You have to have a rainy day fund an emergency fund, cash reserves fund, whatever you want to call it. One of the reasons a lot of married couples get in financial trouble is because when an emergency comes, they don't have adequate reserves. And so they have to put it on a credit card because they haven't saved. And so when you need new tires or if a car breaks down or something else, well, you put it on a credit card. So it is very important to have the discipline to save and to put some money away for a rainy day. So it's so important to save and invest.
Yes, and if you have a saving vehicle at work, like a 401k that you can take advantage of, if your company is going to match, dollar for dollar of what you put in, go ahead and definitely take advantage of that. Don't ignore that, especially a lot of young couples. We see a lot of young couples that they don't know anything about what's going on with 401k. They're not thinking about retirement, but it's very important that if that is offered, go ahead and take advantage of it. And if you're behind the 8 ball on your retirement money, then again, you want to use some of your other sources of income that you're going to use to help fund that and get yourself caught up.
That's exactly right. So that was number 6, save and invest for the future. Number 7, be adequately insured. Adequately insured. Now this is pretty interesting because being a pastor now, I have had the unfortunate but necessary duty of having to sit with families when a loved one has died and having to ask questions like, are you able to pay for the funeral? Does the husband have insurance? And I have been shocked at how many people did not adequately prepare for their death. Or they did all of their insurance through their job, and then once they left that job, they never replaced the insurance. So the bottom line is I tell people this: what would you want to happen, especially for the men, what would you want to happen to your family if you woke up tomorrow in heaven? You woke up tomorrow in heaven, what would you want to happen? It could be something like, well, I'd like for all of my children to be able to go to college without having to pay anything. I'd like for my house to be paid off. I'd like for my debts to be paid off. I'd like for my family to live a certain lifestyle, even if I'm not here. Well, that's going to take money. So if you don't already have it saved, which is what we call self-insured, then you're going to need some kind of life insurance. So we tell people, make sure that you are adequately insured.
That's so important.
And by the way, that is good stewardship. And I want to say, especially to the men, don't leave your wife in a precarious situation. And too many men do that, where the wives struggle after the husband passes away.
That's
And
great.
statistically, a little over 70% of women will be widows. So you have to really think about that, because it's important that you are taken care of once your husband is gone. And where are the documents and all of those things that we don't want to talk about. Believe me, we know it's very tough, but it has to be discussed.
So women, ask your husbands, babe, how much life insurance do you have? Now, he might look at you funny, like, are you going to poison me tonight or something? You're going to like taste the food real slowly. But it is really important that you take care of that.
Yes.
All right, number 8, honor God with your wealth. Honor God with your wealth. In other words, be a generous giver. And the way to do that is to honor God first, not last. A lot of couples say, Lee, we have a heart for giving, but we just don't have anything left once we take care of this and take care of this and take care of this. And I say, well, that's because you're not honoring God first. And so it takes faith. And this woman has taught me faith. She was a tither. She was a giver when we met. I was just learning how to do that. And she really encouraged me. And most of the time, not all the time, most of the time the woman is more generous than the man. And so I have learned to let her lead me in this area as it relates to generosity.
Number 9 is teach your children about money. That's super important, that your children know about the value of the dollar, that you don't just give them money without them knowing, how money is actually comes into your home. And we had our children divide their money up into 3 categories: give, save, spend, and then that's how they had to do their money. So now as they're older, they're really great with money. Our kids they're really awesome with money. And also, when our children were younger, if they wanted something like an expensive pair of tennis shoes and those types of things, and it wasn't Christmas and it wasn't their birthday, they had to have some skin in the game. So we're like, yeah, well, of course you can have that, but you're going to have to produce some money in order to get it. So we'll meet you halfway. If you come up with half, we'll do half.
That's good.
And so that way they learn, oh, I can't just get what I want anytime I want it.
That's right. Well, lastly, and it's very important for you to do this one, develop an estate plan. Develop an estate plan. Now, that can get very complicated. It depends on how much assets that you have, or if you have businesses and so forth, but I'm just going to make it very simple. Make sure you have an updated will. I was shocked that 7 out of 8 Americans don't have a will.
Wow.
I mean, that's a lot, or an updated will. And many of those don't have a will, period. And so it is very important to have a will. I believe it is Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And so in order to leave an inheritance and to do it in an orderly fashion, you have to make sure that you have all that legal stuff taken care of. And by the way, which means you're going to have to talk about your death. Talk about what you want to happen. And for a lot of people, that's very uncomfortable, but it is necessary.
It's a powerful thing.
Yes.
You guys, thank you so much. It's been so incredibly practical, but just also it just so matters to our relationships, doesn't it? It's such a dynamic that's so difficult for so many couples, but this is so helpful. What is one thing, one small thing that everybody can do this next week to talk about marriage and finances and how those two things go together?
Okay.
I would say just take your sheet home, your list of 10 things, and just pick one thing to talk about. Just one initially, especially if you guys don't typically talk about this area. Just pick one thing that you feel like for you is important, and your spouse as well, and let them pick the one thing that they feel is the most important on the list.
That's right. And so the husband picks one thing, the wife picks one thing, and you just attack that one thing and make sure you get it right. And I would just say, secondly, of course, we don't do it as often now, but we used to have Money Mondays. And but I would say at least once a month, even if it's over dinner or taking a long ride or going to the park. Just sit down, pray with your spouse, thank the Lord for what He has done for you financially, how He's provided for your needs, and then to talk about your dreams and your goals and where you are and where you would like to be, and talk about some of the challenges and some of the things you can do better. And I'm telling you, if you get a habit of doing that at least once a month, it will bring you closer together, and I believe God will bless even a lot of your dreams and goals.
Lee and Martika, thank you guys so much. Can you guys help me thank Lee and Martika? Thank you guys.
Thanks again for listening to the Married People Podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps us reach more people with the podcast. And if you want more marriage resources, check out our website at marriedpeople.org. Until next time, I'm Afton, and thanks for listening.